I own two Gibson Les Paul Customs. Now, from afar, they probably look similar. This is a 2012 build, and if you were to see this up close, it would look dinged. It would be very played. There's lots of scratches. There are finish spots that have worn down over time, and this is due to genuine touring and play wear. However, if I showed you my other Gibson Les Paul Custom, you would also note that this one is significantly more worn and played looking compared to my 2012, even though this guitar is less than a year old. But this is a Gibson Les Paul Custom Murphy Lab edition. This is a relic'd guitar. In this video, we're going to talk about the history of relic'd guitars and how they really took over the entire guitar world. Now, in order to understand where we're at today with the relic'd guitar world, we have to go back to the 1980s to where the relicing process, as we know it today, started, and that is in the guitar repair shops all over the world, beginning about the 80s, early 80s, mid 80s or so. Repairmen would often repair vintage guitars, and in order to cover up their repair, they would kind of relic and age and paint match that specific area that was worked on to match the rest of the guitar, because after all, you wouldn't want your 1950s Telecaster to look new in one specific area and draw attention to it. You wanted it to blend in with the rest of the guitar, and that is really the basis of relicing. And before we go any further, I would like to shout out the sponsor of this video, Sweetwater, for allowing me to show you guys this amazing Murphy Lab Gibson Les Paul. And for all of your guitar needs, relic'd or not, head on over to sweetwater.com. Relicing as we know it today really started life at the Fender booth at NAMM 1995. You see, there was a guy named Vince Canetto who had a friend, J.W. Black, who worked at Fender's custom shop. He showed him his, what we now know as a relic'd guitar, and J.W. Black in turn showed his boss, John Page, head of the Fender custom shop, the guitars, and they were impressed. And so it was. At the 1995 NAMM show at the Fender booth, there were two different prototypes made using the relicing process. One was a Fender Nocaster and the other was a Mary Kay Stratocaster. Now, none of the show goers were the wiser, and they thought they were the actual vintage pieces that Fender brought out of the archive and had them on display under glass just for the sake of the show, when in reality, they were new guitars made to look old. Now, due to the vintage nature of relicing, a lot of people are kind of understandably a little skittish about the idea of making fake vintage instruments, because where exactly is the line between a counterfeit vintage instrument and something made for its aesthetic appeal? So often in a lot of relic'd guitars, you will see some sort of stamp on the inside of the body or somewhere physically on the guitar identifying it as a relic. For example, Fender in 1995 would stamp the inside of their bodies relic, so there was no mistaking it for an actual vintage guitar. Now, upon release, Fender's Relic series guitars were an instant smash hit, and just a few years later, in the late 90s, Gibson would put a little twist on the entire relic idea by releasing relic'd guitars that were modeled and recreated of specific guitars, celebrity guitars like Billy Gibbons's Pearly Gates, for an example. Whereas the Fender Relic series were just kind of meant to recreate the nostalgia and the general feel, Gibson's Relic jobs were recreating actual physical real life guitars, and they enlisted their very own Tom Murphy to help them do it. Now, Tom Murphy initially started working for Gibson in 1989, but even by then, he had had a lot of time spent working with vintage instruments, and he had really had a feel for how an instrument would age over time depending on the conditions in which it saw over its lifetime. Now, what was unique about Tom Murphy's idea of a relic guitar is he would develop specific techniques and tools and ways to age the finish that were unique to Gibson's and therefore able to recreate very, very accurately the celebrity guitars that were being reissued. Now, once the Fender and Gibson relic'd guitars had kind of seen the light of day and were kind of absorbed into the populace, it was really just a no holds barred, floodgates are open situation for literally every guitar maker, large or small, to offer some kind of a relic'd finish, whether it was specialty, one-off, or otherwise. Relic has become just a mainstay in the guitar culture, and you can see all sorts of celebrity players, ranging from John Mayer to Sting to a gazillion other players, play their road-worn guitars that were, relic'd, rather than their actual vintage pieces that they can now leave at home. They didn't have to bring out their $150,000 Les Paul out on the road. They could just take a replica of it and have it aesthetically look the same. And you know what? That's a win-win for everyone. So that's it. That is the history of guitar relicing. I hope you've enjoyed the little story time, and shout out once again to sweetwater.com for sponsoring this video. And with that, you've been wonderful. I've been Fluff. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.